Welcome back to Open Line. We have with us Mayor David Briley. We also have with us Bill Herbert, who is the Codes Director. Just asked the Mayor a bunch of questions. I want to ask you, before we go to the phones, Bill Herbert with Codes, short-term rentals, you said that's one of your biggest areas of concern. What are you doing about short-term rentals, specifically enforcement, but just big picture, short-term rentals? What are you doing about that?
So short-term rentals are a problem in a number of areas. First, it's the law, and the law has changed about 16 times since it was first enacted through Metro, and now there's a state law that kind of overrides that as well. So it's complicated in terms of just general enforcement. We've written about almost 8,000 short-term rental permits since the program began. I've got one person in my staff that's dedicated to full-time issuance of short-term rental permits. That means that person has to review all of the applicable laws, be apprised of those, apply those on a daily basis, and then issue the permits. There are a lot of properties out there that are operating that are not in compliance. We know through our host compliance software exactly where those properties are. We know the address, we know the owner, we know the parcel number, we know exactly where they are, but we don't have the ability to enforce against them. And what I mean by that is, from a staffing level, we've written about a little over 650 warrants in the last 2 years on short-term rentals. Currently, if we were to file a warrant in court on a short-term rental, it would be August before it could be heard. The court's dockets are inundated. Metro Legal doesn't have the attorneys to prosecute the cases that we are bringing warrants on. The courts don't have the ability to set the dockets necessary to hear the cases. So it's a system-wide issue that we grapple with daily.
So there are people out there that have played by the rules, they've gotten the permit, they've gone through the things you're supposed to go through, and there are thousands that have not done that. And you're saying you know where they are, but right now you're not able to go and get them.
That's correct. That's correct. As of this morning, there were 1,212 properties operating short-term rentals that either didn't have permits or weren't paying taxes, or both.
And so last night I was in the Nations for a neighborhood association meeting. There was a guy who asked about short-term rentals, and he had moved back here from another town, grew up here and then moved back, and he moved right next to a short-term rental. And he said, I regret moving back because I moved right next to the short-term rental. And so he calls the police, and it takes the police a while to get there, and it is just really persistent. And so some of the short-term rentals have really diminished the quality of life for our neighbors. So one of the things that's on the horizon is that we've done a fee study to look at whether or not we're charging a big enough fee for short-term rentals, and we don't think we are. That fee's going to go up this summer, and we're going to find some additional resources to help with codes enforcement on short-term rentals so that nobody gets chased out of their house by a short-term rental. One of the problems with short-term rentals is that it might be an owner who lives in New York, for example, and he hires or she hires somebody to manage the facility here, and they rent through a platform that's on the internet, and so they don't really have a whole lot of connection. They're not there to monitor the short-term rental. So there are others that are great, where it's somebody who has a in-law apartment behind their house, and they rent it on the weekends, and they're always there. And those are, they're a form of income for folks. And so we've got to do a better job, frankly, of doing enforcement on it. We're going to get more resource to it quickly.
Is it the police department's responsibility or codes? Do you send someone out there, or do they call the police and the police go out there?
So it depends on what the allegation is. So if it's, say, excessive noise, they're just being too rowdy, that's police, and that's because that can be a criminal offense. If it's lewd conduct, it can be a criminal offense. For us, we're about enforcing on those people who either don't have a permit, or who are not paying taxes.
And that's in your court. That's your
that's
job.
in my court. That's in Codes court. If people are being disruptive, that's in the police's court.
And Codes, right now, do you have enough people to, and you don't have enough people to enforce that?
We are doing the best we can with what we've got, and quite frankly, I mean, you know, we've written over 650 warrants. The Board of Zoning Appeals is inundated with short-term rental appeals, and those appeals are because of our enforcement actions. That's what's driving the warrants, the courts, and the appeals through the Board of Zoning Appeals.
All right, let's go to the phones here. Let's go to Brian. Hello, Brian.
Good afternoon.
Go right ahead.
Yeah, good afternoon to you and your guest tonight. Hello, Mr. Mayor. Continue doing a great job that I think you're doing under very hard and stringent conditions right now. But I give you big props for doing so. My big question tonight is, why did Core Civic, formerly Corrections Corporation of America, give Nashville government $10 million? And why I ask that is that, are they using that to try to get some kind of special benefit, some type of lobbying campaign? Right now, most people don't know the second largest private prison company is based out of Green Hills.
I know what he's talking about.
Another company is called GEO, and the other one's called CXW. Basically, these companies not only keep low-level offenders like the detainees that are on our border. People don't realize that they're making money off of immigrants. So while on one side they may say Republicans, we're against immigration, illegal immigration is paying a lot of people on Wall Street big dividends.
So your question is why? What's your question exactly?
Basically, why would Metro accept $10 million? What is Core Civic expecting with that kind of money?
Okay, all right, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. You said you're aware of this situation.
Well, thank you for props to start with, Brian. But so we got $10 million from the CCA, the Convention Center Authority. We did not get $10 million from CCA. So I think there was just some confusion about where what CCA meant. We got $10 million from the Convention Center Authority, not from.
Well, that was from my earlier question. CCA is Convention Center Authority. So it's also Corrections Corporation of America.
Yeah. So we've got no money from CCA.
Okay, I think we can clear that up. All right, let's go to Sarah. Hello, Sarah. Go right ahead.
I'm here.
What's on your mind? Go ahead.
Hey, thank you very much. So, in recent public appearances, Mr. Mayor, you've stated that police officers haven't told you that they were having to file bankruptcy or were struggling to make ends meet, not able to pay their bills and such, after not receiving those COLA raises. Do you think it's necessary that Metro employees should offer that kind of evidence of despair before the city adjusts pay? And I'd like for you to talk about that in congruence with the explosive growth that we've experienced and the increased cost of living.
Sure.
Okay.
So, you know, this is one of those things that came up on Twitter where I think somebody took something out of context that I'd said. I have great respect for our police officers, and they, despite not getting a pay raise this year, have worked hard to do their job, and have not, as I put it, they haven't been complaining about their pay. They have just done their jobs, and I have great respect for them for doing that. And it doesn't make sense in many respects that we would have so much growth and development and not have revenue. I think that's why you asked me the question about that, and I think I tried to explain why that was the case. If anybody was offended by that, by anything I said about police not complaining, I hope they understand I made it. What I said was to give props to the police for, in a year where they didn't get a pay raise, for still coming to work, doing their job, and protecting us all.
And are you? Well, let's just take more calls. I appreciate the call, Sarah. Let's go to Ann. Hello, Ann.
Hi. Right now, there's legislation that would alter the way or the demographic of our COB. It would also make it possible for a Metro employee to serve on the board of the COB. And I believe would also affect the composition of all the boards that Metro has. So are you as mayor prepared for those changes should this legislation pass?
This is the Community Oversight Board. There's obviously legislation in the state legislature that would impact the Community Oversight Board. What do you say there to her question?
Well, I'm aware of the legislation. I actually went up to the, I guess it's the Criminal Justice Subcommittee of the House Judiciary Committee and spoke in opposition to that legislation 2 weeks ago, and have expressed my desire that the will of the voters here in Nashville not be altered by any state legislation. The legislation that's pending up there, however, will have some impact on the Community Oversight Board. I don't know if it will have any impact on any other board or commission. I don't think it will, and we don't certainly read it that way right now. But it would change the composition, or potentially could change the composition. And so right now, the referendum that passed limits who can be on the Community Oversight Board. And those limitations would go away if the existing state law passed. So that would really require us to work hard with the Metro Council to make sure that in the context of their elections, of their 9 and the 2 that I appoint, that we remain conscientious about fulfilling the will of the voters when they adopted this charter amendment. So we could still, I think, comply with their wishes. We just couldn't. It would have to be by vote and by nomination. We just couldn't. We couldn't do it by rule. And so I'm optimistic that we'll get some relief from what is currently pending up there at the state. I would prefer for them to do nothing and just leave us exactly like we are. But at the end of this, we're going to have a Community Oversight Board. We're going to make it work here in Nashville. You were opposed to the Community Oversight Board, the language that created it. Right. And there might be a caller who would say, how vigorously will you fight for it if the legislature wants to alter it in some way? What about that? Sure. So I think it was a pretty unprecedented move for me to go up here and at that subcommittee and be cross-examined for about 45 minutes by members of the legislature. I think I demonstrated to the city that I'm willing to stand up and fight against this kind of overreach by the state. All right. All right, let's go to Carolyn. Carolyn, are you there?
Steve.
It's Steve. Steve, go right ahead.
Yes. Yes, I have a question for the mayor. Good evening. How are you all doing?
All right. How are you?
We're doing well. Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, I got a comment, and then I'm going to hang up, and I'm going to let you answer, please. I'm a business owner here in the East Nashville area, and I had a gentleman, a young man, who came in and robbed my place of business at gunpoint. He pulled a gun on my wife and I, and he took all of the week's earnings from the business. I chased that young man 1 block down the street, and he was armed. I shot that young man 3 times in the back, and he was there with a gun in his hand and all of my weekly earnings from my place of business. The Metro Police came out, the homicide people came out, and they told me that I was going to be arrested. They told me that I cannot shoot a person that had came in and committed a crime and was running away from me, that he was no more danger to me and my wife. And I went to court, and the DA told me the same thing. My attorney told me the same thing, and they told me that they charged me with contempt to commit murder. I've never been arrested a day in my life. My attorney told me that it's best for me to go ahead and take the plea bargain for 10 years probation. I done that. And I'm going to say this, Mayor, then I'm going to hang up. I don't see no difference in what I done than what that Metro policeman done. And by the way, my attorney was Mr. Glenn Funk. And he advised me that I was wrong. Go ahead and take the 10 years probation. And I'm going to hang up there. And I'll wait for your comment. Thank you.
There's a lot there, Steve. Okay, what do you want to say?
Well, again, I think this is pending ongoing litigation, so it's kind of hard for me to comment about the comparison between the two events. I certainly I do want to offer my sympathy for him that he was robbed at gunpoint, and he and his wife were threatened, and I'm sorry that that happened to him, because it sounds like it was a really horrible, traumatic event for him in his life and his wife. So I guess that's all I can say about that, Ben.
Steve, thanks for sharing your story. Thank you. We're going to take one more call here. I believe this is Carolyn. Carolyn, is this you?
Yes.
Go right ahead.
Hello. I just wanted to make a few comments. I wanted to see why that there's so much crime in Nashville. It's gotten so bad over the last few years. And I know that a lot of people are happy about the growth of Nashville. I personally do not think it's a good thing. We've got overcrowded schools. We have crowded roads. And, you know, it's just a mess trying to get around. I get run over. I try to drive the speed limit, but I almost get run over every day by some driver that's driving way over the speed limit. They never seem to get stopped. I love the police officers, and I think they do a great job, but I think we're too easy on crime here. I think that when we see people repeating crime over and over again and being let back out on the street, it's a shame. And so that's what I wanted to say tonight.
All right, thank you, Carolyn. Why so much crime? Are we too easy on crime?
Well, let me start by saying, as I said, I've been out doing these community conversations, and what she's mentioning is one of the things I've heard very consistently is people are concerned about the pace of growth and how much we're changing, and we're gonna be focused on making sure that neighborhoods are not adversely impacted by the growth and development we're seeing. I don't think there's really anything we can do as a community to stop the growth we're seeing in some respect, and it's really up to me to make sure that it's high quality growth and that the city continues to prosper so that our kids and grandkids have an opportunity to live here in a high quality place and get good jobs. When it comes to crime, and I know that there is a sense out there that crime is up, and in certain areas it certainly is. That's especially true on the larcenies and auto thefts are up quite a bit over the last few years. Crimes of opportunity, let's call them. Violent crime is actually coming down in most respects in Nashville right now, and I look every week. The police department puts out a comp stat report that looks at crime, and so I just looked at it this morning for the March 9th version of that report, and we're seeing violent crime tick down. Not fast enough, but it is ticking down. That doesn't mean that when anybody who is a victim of crime, we certainly want to do more, and it's always a letdown when anything happens like that. But we're seeing crime tick down. One of the areas where we have work to do, frankly, is on juvenile crime. And so we're seeing younger and younger juveniles involved in crime, and that is especially troubling because if you're 12 years old and making the decision to even have a handgun, you're really making a really tragic fundamental mistake in your life, and we've got work to do to figure out why that's happening and what resources we need to get to work to make a difference on that, and been working with Judge Callaway recently on that front to try and roll out some new initiatives in that regard. I'm going to say one thing before we end on this, and say that a lot of the juveniles we're seeing right now are getting handguns out of cars that are left in the glove compartment. And so we're seeing kids in certain neighborhoods walk down the street and check door after door after door on cars. They find a car that's open, they find a handgun in the glove compartment. And so one of the things that we would really love for people to stop doing is leaving guns in their cars, because it is one of the clearest avenues towards youth violence that we're seeing right now. And so if folks, they have the legal right to do it in our state, but if you would stop doing that, we think it could make a big difference in terms of criminal conduct here in Nashville. We've also started this great new program that's a collaboration between all of the local law enforcement agencies here in Nashville to start looking at the shell casings that pop out of semi-automatic weapons. They all have a fingerprint. We're dumping those fingerprints into a new computerized database, and it's generating a whole lot more leads for us in terms of going out there and fighting crime and trying to get guns out of the hands of criminals before it elevates to a murder or something along those lines.
There are some who are concerned that we're not tough enough on crime and that people are charged and then immediately released. I know the district attorney is the one who charges. He's an elected official. Do you have some concern about that? Are you hearing that in these neighborhood meetings? Do you wish there were some sort of alteration to a current policy or change?
Well, on the gun crimes, that's why we're working in this new collaboration with all of the agencies here to try and be more aggressive in terms of pursuing enforcement and longer sentences for individuals involved in gun crimes by associating the federal system where they have the more capacity to do that. So yeah, I'm worried about that. But when a 12-year-old, when their first encounter with the juvenile court is that they skipped school for 2 weeks, we don't want to incarcerate that young person. We want to find the resources necessary to help them avoid that, the next step being a car theft or a robbery. And so there's not much we can do with a 12-year-old to be tougher on them. It's really more about finding a way to get them on a different path, and that's what we're working with Judge Calloway on.
All right, we're going to take a break. We'll come back, take more questions, codes, and for the mayor, take a break, be back right after this.